Oh, faithfully delivering value and exploring great books from around the world. Hi there, this is Sally Talks Books. Today I'll be interpreting the book History of the Late Ming Peasant Wars. So, what do you know about the Great Peasant Uprising in the late Ming Dynasty? And how do you view the rebel leaders Li Zicheng and Zhang Xianzhan? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. In ancient China, there's this pattern. Whenever a feudal dynasty is about to decline, a massive peasant uprising breaks out. What follows is the collapse of order and total chaos across the land. Eventually, the old dynasty gets buried, and a new one rises from the ruins. The Qin, Han, Tang, and Yuan dynasties all went through this, and the Ming was even more so. Why say even more so? Because this peasant war in the late Ming had a way bigger scope, lasted longer, and was on a grander scale than any before. Plus, it was brutally intense, to the point that even today, folks reading about it in history books get chills down their spine and can't bear to look. Take Sichuan, a populous province. It got hit hard by the war, leading to mass deaths. By the early Qing dynasty, much of Sichuan turned into ghost towns, so the court moved millions from Hubei, Hunan, and elsewhere to fill the gap. This is called Huguang fills Sichuan, a real testament to how cruel the late Ming peasant wars were. So, how did such a massively destructive war actually start? Why couldn't the Ming dynasty crush it and instead got overthrown by it? And why was the once mighty peasant army beaten by the Qing forces, vanishing like a shooting star? All these questions get answered in today's talk on the late Ming peasant wars. The author is Mr. Gu Qing, an internationally renowned expert in Ming-Qing history who only put out 2 books in his life. One's History of the Southern Ming, covered by Sally Talks Books, and the other's History of the Late Ming Peasant Wars. He spent decades digging up sources, checking facts, clarifying the truth, and painting a clear picture of the war. Right after it came out in 1984, historians praised it highly, and it's still the go-to authority in the field. Now, I'll break down this book into 3 parts. Part 1. Officials forced the people to rebel, the causes of the late Ming peasant wars. Part 2. Fighting far and wide, the peasant army growing stronger despite suppression. Part 3. Peak and fall, from toppling the Ming to rapid collapse. Okay, let's dive into Part 1. Officials forced the people to rebel. The cause of the late Ming peasant wars, like all dynastic uprisings, boils down to officials forced the people to rebel. The mid to late Ming faced this, and the ruling clique's total decay made things way worse. But what is it? What does comprehensive decay mean? It means from the emperor down to the bureaucrats. They only knew how to hoard wealth like crazy, totally ignoring the peasants' lives. The entire court and society were deeply corrupt. This decay started with Emperor Wanli. He had a dispute with ministers over appointing the crown prince and actually didn't hold court for over 20 years, leading to government neglect. Emperor Wanli was also super greedy, sending hordes of eunuchs to extort money from people everywhere for his own use. Emperor Wanli's grandson, Emperor Tianji, was even worse. His favorite hobby was carpentry. He'd bury himself in woodworking all day and left state affairs to the eunuch Wei Zhangxian. In 1627 AD, Emperor Tianji died, and Emperor Changzhen took the throne. He was frugal and thrifty, but couldn't handle the massive expenses. Back then, the court's biggest expense was for the imperial clan's perks. Members like the emperor, sons, and brothers got fiefdoms to become feudal princes. Where did those fiefdoms come from? Nominally, it was an imperial grant, but honestly, it was stolen from peasants. The court also poured tons of silver for the princes' spending. These princes had nothing to do, weren't allowed to leave their fiefs, and all day, besides partying and reproducing, they had little else. When Emperor Chongzhen became emperor, the imperial plan had ballooned to over 200,000 people, costing millions of taels of silver a year. A huge burden. To feed this royal crowd, officials had to invent excuses to tax peasants extra, called surcharges. And eventually, surcharges even exceeded regular taxes, making life miserable for folks. Of course, officials skimmed off plenty for themselves. Why else would they be so gung-ho? In the early Chongzhen era, Lian Tingdong, the Minister of War, exposed that local officials created countless fake reasons for unauthorized surcharges, and the money went to personal luxuries or bribes. So, not only civil officials were corrupt, military ones were too. In the mid to late Ming, the Jurchens teamed up with Mongol tribes to raid the northern border constantly, growing as a threat. The court spent huge unmilitary funds to keep border armies, but generals pocketed most of it through tricks like skimming soldiers' pay. There was also killing innocents for merit, labeling civilians as bandits, beheading them, and claiming rewards from the court. Some commanders didn't even spare women and kids. Greed and cruelty at its worst. Under government oppression, peasants' lives were awful. If natural disasters hit, there was just no way out. But during the Ming-Qing transition, extreme weather was frequent. Droughts, floods, hailstorms, yet the thoroughly corrupt rulers didn't relieve disaster victims, instead forcing peasants to pay grain taxes. Worse, disaster relief funds were skimmed at every level, with almost nothing reaching the peasants. So tragedies kept piling up. In 1615, during Shandong's famine, a Qinzhou official reported peasants had eaten everything edible and resorted to cannibalism. Officials in Zhucheng described residents scouring hills for food, some collapsing dead mid-search. People would immediately swarm to dismember the corpses. Over a decade later, things worsened. Peasants had no choice but rebellion. In 1627, when Emperor Chongzhen ascended the throne, peasant uprisings erupted in Chongqing County, Shanxi, quickly spreading province-wide. From then on, the Ming Dynasty knew no peace. Thus, the Qingcheng uprising is considered the start of the late Ming peasant wars. Why did Shanxi become the flashpoint?
Because disasters hit hardest there, and social tensions were most explosive.
In late Ming, Shanxi's weather was wildly abnormal.
Records show droughts every other year cracked the earth, killed crops, leaving farmers harvestless.
Yet Shanxi still hosted hordes of royals, 4 or 5 feudal princes alone. Blind to suffering, they demanded luxury while officials oppressed locals ruthlessly, sparking mass resentment. Thus, Shanxi's powder keg tensions. Chengcheng peasants stormed the county office and killed the magistrate when crushing taxes left no escape. A single spark can start a prairie fire. Chengcheng lit the first flame. Hearing this, peasants elsewhere turned farm tools into weapons and rebelled. Suddenly, multiple peasant armies emerged across Shanxi, striking everywhere, overwhelming defenses. But Shanxi's revolt gained momentum and national impact for another reason. Just as uprisings began, the Jurchens, later the Qing, invaded, threatening Beijing. Emperor Chongzhen urgently recalled Shanxi's elite troops to defend the capital. And the leftover troops, old, weak, sick, or disabled, couldn't handle the peasant armies, leaving them free to grow. Worse, furious over withheld pay, Ming troops from Shanxi mutinied multiple times en route to Beijing. Many defected to the peasant army, boosting the rebellion. Seeing things spiral, Emperor Chongzhen finally grasped the severity. He started deploying capable officials to crush the peasant armies within Shanxi. This brings us to Part 2, Fighting Far and Wide. Peasant armies growing stronger amid suppression. From 1699 to 1644, Min forces waged a 16-year campaign against them. Though they scored some victories, overall the peasant armies swelled into a massive force, eventually posing a fatal threat to the Ming, a process in 3 stages. First stage 1, from February 16, 2039 to August 1635, 6.5 years. The basic story. Ming appeasement failed. Peasant armies pushed into the Central Plains. In February 1629, Chongzhen appointed Yang He as governor of Shanxi's 3 borders to lead suppression.
Yang He was upright, capable in administration and military, a solid choice. But, fighting the rebels, he found Shanxi's troops depleted after elite units went to Beijing, making suppression impossible.
He also believed peasants rebelled out of desperation, not true opposition. So he proposed appeasement first, force second. Yang petitioned. Chasing rebels cost huge funds with uncertain results. Better to pay them to return home and farm. If they could survive, they wouldn't rebel. Many ministers backed Yang. Chongzhen agreed to allocate 100,000 taels of silver for implementation. Admittedly, appeasement worked briefly. Key leaders like Shen Yikui, Deng Zi, and Wang Laohu accepted amnesty and disbanded. But soon, Shanxi was in chaos again. Why? Appeasement treated symptoms, not roots. The money only covered short-term needs, while disasters and oppression continued, leaving peasants no choice but to rebel again when funds ran out. But so why discipline treated that? So Yang got trapped in a cycle. Appease, rebel, appease again, rebel again, utterly unable to stabilize things. Finally, the emperor lost his patience. In September of the 4th year of Chongzhen, Yang He was dismissed and imprisoned. This marked the failure of the appeasement policy. The court decided to concentrate forces to pursue the peasant army, but who would lead it? And Emperor Chongzhen chose Hong Zhenchou, who was Yang He's subordinate and had performed brilliantly in fighting the peasant army, being one of the few Ming generals willing to fight tough battles. And Emperor Chongzhen ordered him to take over as governor of Shanxi's 3 borders and allocated some elite Ming troops to his command. Han Chengchou indeed had skills. He won over 100 consecutive battles, inflicting heavy losses on the peasant army. Since it was hard to stay in Shanxi, the peasant army fled east to Shanxi, and for a time Shanxi residents responded en masse. The peasant uprising showed a trend of expanding nationwide. Emperor Chongzhen panicked, ordering Hong Chengchou to send troops into Shanxi, while gathering forces from elsewhere to encircle and annihilate the peasant army. However, Shanxi's terrain is rugged and fragmented. The peasant army fought mobile battles in the mountains, and the Ming army couldn't catch them. In the 6th year of Chongzhen, the peasant army took another strategically significant step. In November of that year, various peasant armies broke through the Yellow River barrier and entered the core territory of the Ming Dynasty. Henan, also known as the Central Plains, those contending for the Central Plains included Gao Yangshang, Li Zicheng, Zhang Shanzhan, and Man Tianxing, with 200,000 to 300,000 troops among the strongest peasant forces. They divided into 3 routes directly threatening key cities like Luoyang, Kaifeng, and Xingyang. Henan Governor Xuan Mo was terrified and begged the court for urgent reinforcements. While the Ming army was busy putting out fires in Henan, Zhang Xianzhang's faction of the peasant army headed east, directly attacking Anhui, and captured Fengyang in the first month of Chongzhen's 8th year. Fengyang is the hometown of Zhu Yuanzhang, known as the Dragon's Rising Place. This time it was easily captured, and even the ancestral tombs of the Zhu family were dug up by the peasant army. When the news arrived, the entire court was shaken. Emperor Chongzhen ordered the execution of Fengyang governor Yang Yipeng and issued a self-criticism edict, going to the ancestral temple to repent to his ancestors. At the same time, large forces were sent to Henan and Anhui to suppress them, but the peasant army turned around and ran back to Shanxi, leaving the Ming army empty-handed. In total, the peasant army had fought across 1,000 miles between Shanxi, Henan, and Anhui. The Ming army could only chase after them, exhausted. Emperor Chongzhen resolved to change tactics to seize battlefield initiative. Thus, the late Ming Peasant War entered its 2nd stage, lasting about 3.5 years, from August of Chongzhen's 8th year to April of the 12th year. The basic situation was the Ming army spreading a 10-sided net, and the peasant army hitting rock bottom. Emperor Chongzhen thought the main reason suppression failed was commanders' authority being split and local officials doing their own thing, letting the peasant army slip through cracks. So, he split the country into two big battlefields, northwest and southeast. The northwest battlefield was handled by Hong Chung-cho, governor of the Three Borders, managing military affairs in Shanxi and Shanxi. The southeast went to Liu Shangshang, general of 5 provinces, covering Anhui, Henan, Huguang, and more. Both did their jobs, cooperating to box in the peasant army. Emperor Chongzhen was super confident in this setup and demanded the peasant army be wiped out fast.
The Ming army's big win this round was capturing Gao Yingshang.
Gao Yingshang called himself the Dashing King and led the strongest peasant force.
Since rising up, he roamed thousands of miles, even threatened the capital. The court saw him as a huge threat to crush completely. Under the Ming army's fierce chase, Gao got trapped in southwestern Shanxi and was captured, sadly.
The Ming army hauled him to Beijing and killed him. But the problem was they were encircling and pursuing. Gao's capture left gaps. Li Zicheng got active in Shanxi, Gansu, Ningxia, Zhangxianzhang, and others in the Central Plains. Elimination was still way off. Ultimately, the Ming army just didn't have enough troops to cover it all. It was like pressing down one gourd only to have another float up. Fixing one problem caused another. So, Emperor Chongzhen put Yang Xichang, Yang He's son, in as Minister of War. He took charge overall, focusing forces to crush the peasant army. After taking office, Yang Xichang tackled 3 big things: setting strategy, securing troops and funds, and pushing talent. Yang Xichang first mapped core and peripheral war zones. Core troops hounded the peasant army, while the peripheries sealed off escapes. This was like spreading a net, closing in from all sides, squeezing the peasant army's space. That's the 10 sides part. Spreading the net.
Yang Xichang also kept a mobile force ready to rush in and hit the peasant army's weak spots.
To spread this big net, they needed plenty of troops and supplies. So, Yang Xichang proposed 1 soldier, 1 ration, recruiting 120,000 troops and raising 2.8 million taels of silver for funds. Even the usually stingy Emperor Chongzhen gritted his teeth and agreed. Right after, Yang Xichang deployed commanders, bringing over top Ming fighters like Hong Changchu, Zhuo Liangyu, and He Renlong, all prepped. He boasted to Emperor Chongzhen he'd settle things in 3 months. The 10-sided net launched, with the Ming army encircling tightly and pressing hard. The peasant armies faced their toughest situation since the rebellion began. Take Li Zicheng and Zhang Xianzhang's forces as examples. Li, after brutal fights, retreated to mountainous borders of Shanxi, Hubei, and Sichuan with just 1,500 men left. Zhang Xianzhang's troops maneuvered between Henan and Hubei against Min forces, but ultimately surrendered due to weakness. Other peasant armies scattered or surrendered. By early Chongzhen 12th year, the rebellion hit rock bottom, just as Emperor Chongzhen made a huge mistake.
Just as Shanxi's Ming army forced Zhang's surrender and cornered Li, the Qing invaded, threatening Beijing. Chongzhen urgently recalled Hong Changchu as a stopgap, planning to send him back later. But Hung's entire army was wiped out by the Qing at the Battle of Songjin.
Suddenly, the Ming's heaven and earth net against peasant armies had a gaping hole. How could rebels miss this chance? In May 1640, Zhang Xianzhang seized the moment and rebelled again at Gucheng, Hubei. The war entered its 3rd phase. From May 1640 to January 1644, peasant armies surged back, establishing regimes while the Ming Dynasty teetered. The Ming Dynasty was crumbling. Facing reignited war, Chongzhen ordered Yang Xichang to the front lines to annihilate rebels. But times had changed. Yang lacked troops to contain Zhang, and with Ming forces fixated on Zhang, Li Zicheng found room to rebound. Li emerged from the mountains, swelling in power, forcing the Ming back into futile chasing, with predictable results. Ming troops ran ragged, Shanxi, Henan, Anhui, dizzy and overwhelmed by peasant army tactics. In early 1641, Li Zicheng captured Luoyang, a key Henan city, capturing Prince Fuzu Changsun.
Prince Fuzu Changchun! A month later, Zhang Shanzhong stormed Shenyang in Hubei, capturing Prince Shangzu Yiming. Hated for their tyranny, these princes were executed by rebels, winning massive public support.
Rebel momentum soared. Losing two major cities and princes in a month was an unprecedented Ming disaster.
Yang Xichang, terrified, died of shock and fear.
From then on, the Ming had no one capable of unified command. In contrast, peasant armies united through prolonged combat, forming two major regimes under Li Zicheng and Zhang Xianzhong. Let's focus here on the Dacian regime founded by Li Zicheng. Li Zijing was originally Gao Yingshang's top general. After Gao's death, he took the Dacian king title, rebuilt forces, and shattered the Ming's 10-sided net strategy. Afterward, Li led his troops across the Central Plains, massively draining the Ming's military strength. Wherever Li went, he abolished harsh taxes, promised no forced labor or grain levies, appointed officials to restore order, and encouraged production. These moves transformed his forces from raiders into a proper regime. Li was truly preparing for statehood, using his influence to unite peasant armies under his command by winter 1642. With Ming forces in Henan mostly wiped out, Li marched south to Hubei. Next spring, he renamed Shenyang to Shanjing, created central institutions, and reorganized the peasant army under unified command. By then, except for Zhang Shangshang's faction, all peasant armies answered to Li Zicheng.
Emperor Chongzhen fought like a cornered beast, ordering Sun Xuanting, governor of three borders, to lead the Ming's last elite force inside the pass to crush them.
But they fell into a trap at Shanzhou, Henan, collapsing completely. Li then marched north, took Xi'an, and after months of fighting, conquered all Shanxi. Sun died in battle. Thus, Li connected vast territories across Shanxi, Henan, and Hubei, laying the regime's foundation. In early 1644, Chongzhen's 17th year, Li proclaimed the Dachun kingdom in Xi'an, adopting the era name Yongchan. Meanwhile, Zhang Shanzhong, unwilling to submit, dug into Sichuan. He created the Daxi regime. These twin regimes transformed the war from peasant uprising to dynastic overthrow, a true change of mandate. Since Zhang stayed put in Sichuan, the heavy task fell to Dacian, with larger territory, stronger roots, and greater might. All conditions were now ripe. Facing the rising Dachun, the Ming dynasty teetered on collapse. In Part 3, I'll cover Li's overthrow of the Ming and why the mighty peasant army fell to the Qing, vanishing swiftly. On the 8th day of 1644's first lunar month, just 8 days after founding Dachun, Li led his main force from Xi'an toward Beijing. Oh, along the way, except for a battle at Ningwu and Shanxi, major strongholds like Taiyuan, Datong, and Xuanhua surrendered without a fight. Even Julian Pass, Beijing's northwest gate, gave in without resistance. The other Dachun army unit also sailed smoothly, quickly seizing cities like Xingtai and Baoding.
Surrounding Beijing from the south, on March 17th, the main force of the Dachun army had arrived at the city gates.
Xi'an and Beijing are over 1,100 kilometers apart.
With ancient transport, one trip would take over a month, but Li Zicheng led his army and covered the whole distance in just over 2 months. This wasn't war, it was basically a forced march.
Why was the Dachun army's advance so swift?
The direct reason? The Ming Dynasty was just too weak.
Over the past decade, the Ming army had been worn down by repeated attacks from peasant armies and the Qing, leaving only Wu Sangui's troops guarding Shanhaiguan, known as the Guanning Cavalry. And
they were still somewhat elite, but other units had really weak combat strength. Faced with the fierce Dacian army, they were scared out of their wits and surrendered one after another.
More fatally, the Ming emperor and his officials were deeply divided. Chongzhen still wanted to save the realm. It was, after all, the Zhou family's legacy.
But his ministers had long started plotting escape routes, just looking out for themselves.
For example, when the Dachun army was at the city gates, Chongzhen summoned royal relatives and officials to donate money and supplies for the front. In the end, Even Chengzhen's father-in-law, Zhou Kui, only coughed up a measly 3,000 taels of silver. Others were even worse. A regime this fragmented was bound to collapse sooner or later, and Li Zicheng's policies also helped the army push forward fast. Wherever the Dachshund army went, they reasoned and appealed to emotions, promising that surrender would guarantee all citizens' lives. After entering cities, they sent officials to take over government offices while calming folks and restoring order. Harsh Ming taxes were abolished too. All this effectively shattered Ming resistance, letting the Dachshund army reach Beijing smoothly.
On March 17th, the Dacian army attacked Beijing, and by the evening of the 18th, they'd broken into the city.
Chongzhen Emperor knew it was hopeless and took his own life. On the morning of the 19th, Li Zisheng entered Beijing, passing Chengtianmen, today's Tiananmen. He drew his bow and shot an arrow at the plaque. That's how he declared the Ming Dynasty's fall. Li Zizheng never imagined that just over 30 days later, he'd face a crushing defeat at Shanhaiguan. The Dacian regime also collapsed. What exactly happened between easily overthrowing the Ming Dynasty and being swiftly defeated by the Qing army? A widely circulated view is that after capturing Beijing, the Dacian army rapidly corrupted, with soldiers looting everywhere, committing crimes, and their fighting spirit quickly fading away. That's why they were utterly defeated at the Battle of Shanhaiguan, directly causing the regime to fall apart. The author of this book disagrees with this view. Well, first, historical records show that although some individual commanders had poor conduct, corruption didn't spread widely. Second, even if they relaxed after capturing Beijing, it's unbelievable that a crack force could lose its spirit in just over 20 days. The author analyzes that the real reason for the Dachshund army's failure was policy mistakes, specifically failing to adjust the pursuing ill-gotten gains to aid military funds policy in time. The so-called pursuing ill-gotten gains to aid military funds means confiscating land, money, etc., from officials, gentry, and landlords to keep the regime running. This was the Dachshund army's standard practice, continued after capturing Beijing. From top officials like the Grand Secretary and ministers down to lower-level bureaucrats and eunuchs, all were forced to pay huge sums. Soon homes were confiscated. Zhou Kui, mentioned earlier, was pressured by his son-in-law, Emperor Chongzhen, to give 3,000 taels of silver, but the Dachshund army seized property worth millions of taels from his home. According to records, the Dachshund regime got over 70 million taels of silver through this pursuit. These assets were squeezed from the people by officials and gentry, so confiscation was arguably fair. The problem is, officials and gentry surrendered to the Dachshund regime to protect their interests, but ended up losing everything. How could they not hold a grudge? Li Zicheng was too impatient. He should have waited until the regime stabilized before doing this.
Even worse, in the pursuit process, he acted without strategy and targeted Wu Sanggui's father, Wu Sheng.
As we know, Wu Sangui led the Guanning cavalry, the only capable government force in late Ming. They'd long guarded Shanhaiguan, resisting the Qing army. After Emperor Chongzhen died, Wu Sangui originally planned to submit to Li Zisheng, but unexpectedly, news came from Beijing that his father Wu Sheng was arrested and his property seized.
In a rage, Wu Sangui defected to the Qing.
At this point, Li Zicheng's underestimation of the Qing army's threat became clear, and the Dacian army had been fighting the Ming inside the pass and had little knowledge of the Qing forces. Therefore, upon learning of Wu Sangui's betrayal, Li Zicheng led 100,000 troops to Shanhaiguan, confident that superior numbers would bring quick victory, completely unaware the Qing army would intervene. On April 21st, the Dacian army reached Shanhaiguan and battled Wu Sangui fiercely for a full day and night.
Just as Wu Sangui was about to collapse, Qing forces suddenly attacked, catching the Dacian army off guard and causing total collapse.
Li Zicheng fled back to Beijing, hastily held his coronation ceremony, then retreated. Meanwhile, the Qing army invaded en masse, occupied Beijing, and pursued the Dacian army relentlessly, forcing Li Zicheng to retreat all the way to Xi'an.
Sigh. How could they lose Hebei and Shanxi without even defending them?
Mainly because the Dacian main force was crippled at Shanhaiguan and couldn't resist the Qing. Plus, officials hated the asset seizures, while the Qing promised to protect their interests, so they defected, forcing Li to abandon Xi'an and retreat further. Finally, in 1645, Shunzi's second year, Li Zicheng died fighting at Zhugang Mountain, Hubei. The mighty Dacian regime collapsed. Thus, only Zhang Shizhang's Daxi regime remained of the late Ming peasant armies. As mentioned earlier, Zhang refused to submit to Li, entered Sichuan to establish Daxi, aiming to rule independently. But he made two critical mistakes. First, instead of calming Sichuan's social tensions, Zhang suppressed brutally, worsening conflicts and causing population collapse amid constant war. Second, he ignored when lips are gone, teeth freeze, refusing to ally with Li against the Qing, letting them destroy Dachun before invading Sichuan, where Daxi stood no chance against the Eight Banners. In November 1645, 6 months after Li's death, Zhang Xinjiang was shot by Qing troops at Phoenix Mountain, Chengdu. Daxi fell, plunging the peasant war from peak to valley, though not extinct. Zhang's generals, Sun Qiwang and Li Dingguo, and Li Zicheng's follower, Li Laiheng, joined the southern Ming resistance for prolonged anti-Qing struggle. Not until 1664, Kangxi, third year, was resistance led by former peasant armies fully suppressed. The author details this in History of the Southern Ming, covered by Sally Talks Books. Interested listeners can tune in. In short, spanning 1627 to 1664, this 37-year war was ancient China's largest, longest peasant uprising, profoundly reshaping its course. So, after listening to this episode, what are your thoughts on this war?
Feel free to share your comments below.
All right, that wraps up our interpretation of history of the late Ming peasant wars. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.